Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar about understanding federal deadlines using the Area Agency on Aging budget display footnotes as a tool. I'm Ed Long, Deputy Director here at the California Department of Aging, and so glad you could join us today. And Amanda Evans, our Fiscal Officer, and June Ditchen, our Policy Manager for Program Fiscal, will be doing our presentation. And at this moment, I'll pass it over to June.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending the training. So let's talk about what we're going to be discussing and what our objectives are for this training this morning. So we're going to be discussing the flow of funding, and with the flow of funding, it's really where the funds start from, where your grants come from, and then how they flow through AAAs down to our, down through your service providers. So we're going to discuss a little bit about where that comes from and why it needs to be reported, because it reports from the bottom back up. And then transparency. As the years have gone by, it has been necessary to be able to share information and to be open and transparent about our funding. So, and this is part of our grant requirements. So we're going to discuss a little bit about where transparency comes from and why it's necessary. And then the meat of why you're here today, your budget displays. We're going to focus on the budget displays for your area plan, Title V, and HICAP. And within the budget displays, there are footnotes that have been added this year to kind of explain some of the deadline requirements. And the footnotes that have been added are labeled as A, B, and C.
Okay, and as June spoke, we're going to start out with the flow of funding. Today we're just going to focus on two of our granting authorities, which the first is the Administration on Community Living, which has to do with our area plan and our HICAP funding. We're also going to talk about Department of Labor, our federal department, for our Title V. We receive grant awards from both of those here at Department of Aging. We take the local assistance part of that and we pass that through down to you all, the local AAAs. And then that can potentially be passed on down to the service providers. Part of this, all recipients that receive these funds must expend and report them as required in the terms and agreements with the terms and conditions of the grant award. Also, as June mentioned, the transparency part about this is in regards to receiving the funds. We must comply with the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act, FFATA as it's called. This requires all the grantees to report the subawards into a reporting system. This then makes it where that provides the full funding disclosure and it meets the federal spending transparency requirement. Additionally, in FFATA, this requires us to report all Title III subparts. So for example, Title IIIB, C1, C2, all of those must be reported separately. So what does that really mean? What it means is that the state and the AAAs must properly report all their requests for funds, their expenditures based on these grants, and any of the funding sources that we use to promote the government accountability. Today we're going to spend just time specifically discussing the deadlines for the requests for funds, expenditures, also the transfers and the deadlines for reporting that, and also our closeout reporting and the due dates for that. Pass it over to June so she can talk a little bit about what's in the contracts.
So Exhibit B, Article 5, payments. And I'm sure all of those that are here are familiar with this, and the table that's in the center where it says monthly fiscal reporting due dates. The example I'm going to use is from your first month. So the first month of your contracts for Area Plan, Title V, and HICAP, they're all effective July 1st. That's if the contract is executed, and we know that those contracts are all going to be executed so we can release the funding to you. And you're going to see that request for funds due date is several months before July. And that's because CDA has released those contracts out to you. You know what your funding is. You've prepared your area plan or your area plan update, so you've already planned for how you're going to spend those dollars. And we do advance the funds for you, so the expectation is you'd have an idea of what your need is going to be. And typically it's 1/12 of the contract, so it's a very simple request for funds that you're sending in July, August, and September. And so, you know, it's 1/12, so that's one of the reasons why we do it far enough in advance. It allows us, when July 1 hits and the funds are available through the state, that we can release the monies to you immediately. And then with your expenditure reporting, this is a real key for us. You're going to see that you'll see the April expenditure report is due on May 30th. This allows you as a AAA to get the expenditures from your contractors, reconcile those expenditures, and send an accurate reports to CDA. This deadline is very, very important, and the reason being is because CDA does have to report the information to the federal government, and any given time that you're late on the expenditures or you're not accurate on the expenditures, it can appear that our expenditure reporting is not accurate then to the federal government. So timely reporting, especially in this expenditure area, is extremely important, because by the time we receive your report, it is likely that when we send the report to the federal government, we may be about 1 month behind. So with 33 AAAs, even 5 AAAs, a small percentage being late, will appear that we're not expending the grant timely. So that is something for you to think about, and that is one of the reasons why during the monitoring process we look at the timeliness of reporting. And it can become a monitoring finding if you don't report timely. So let's talk a little bit about closeouts and reporting in your closeout. So Exhibit B, Article 6, closeout, and this is E. Final expenditures must be reported to CDA in accordance with the budget display in Exhibit B. We're going to be discussing that budget display and those footnotes and the reporting deadlines that are there. So, and if your expenditures reported by the contractors exceeds the amount, exceeds the advance amount, CDA will reimburse the difference to the contractor. If the expenditures reported by the contractor are less than the advance, CDA will invoice the contractor for the unexpended funds. It is our hope that neither one of these will happen because you've reported accurately, so that way you have an idea of what you need to be spending, and your contractor has then reported accurately to you. It's not always the case, and so there are times where we may have advanced a few dollars too much and vice versa, and it typically comes down to how you've received your reports from your contractors. So it is also important that you monitor to that.
All right, so now we're going to go into the details of the budget display, which in the budget display it shows the allocation by funding source. And as Jean talked about, we have the new footnotes that detail the requirements for the expenditures, the transfers, and the closeout reporting items. Also on the budget display, it has the administrative maximum allowable and the match requirements, but we're not going to really go into that today. So on the next slide, we see the a very small but detailed part of the area plan budget display. The reason we put that on there, it's just to show that we're going to be discussing those items, the footnote letters. The next display shows a little bit better, able to see, and this is just the admin, but the footnotes are the same. They apply the same way, even though this is just the admin part of the funding. So for example, the first footnote is A, which if you look through, it is down below. It's the second to the last item, and the last item, that's our C1, C2, the general fund. For that item, funds must be expended by June 30th. It is state funds, so therefore it is within the state fiscal year. The final expenditures will be reported on July 31st. Bullets number B, are if you look on that display, you'll see the first line item, which is Title 3B. Those items, but also C1, C2, it goes on through there. Those are all for, the funds must be obligated by September 30th, and for this particular contract, it'd be this in 2016. And final expenditures then would be reported in the closeout that's due on July 31st, 2017. Transfers of the baseline amount, which is what that column is right next to the footnotes, that amount needs, that's for the time period of July 1st, 2016 through September 30th, 2016, those transfers need to be reported to CDA by May 1st. These funds, though, however, may not be carried over into the next contract and must be fully expended in this contract. Then footnote C, that is, if you look on there, for example, the second line down, that's the 3B item. But again, C1, C2, all of that have the same on through all the Title III funding. Those funds must be reported in the closeout of July 31st. They may be carried over into the next contract period, and that would be considered like OTO funding. The baseline requests for transfers there for the October 1st through June 30th, because that is the new grant period for area plan starts on October 1st. Those transfers are due on May 1st also. That is the area plan budget display. Now we'll go over the Title V budget display.
There we go. Okay, Title V. So our Title V budget display, for those of you who have recently received your Title V contract, this might be a slightly different view than what you have currently. The new budget display will be released out, and really what you're seeing is the federal program. You see a total dollar there, but you also see the maximum allowance for administration at 8%, and you see the maximum 79% for participant wages and fringe benefits, and then the remainder for your Title V participant other costs. An important line that you see on this budget display is the number of participant slots. This number of participant slots is used when you're budgeting for your Title V budget, for what we originally allot to you, but because of California's high rate for employment, your participant slots might be adjusted to what we call modified slots. And your Title V team can explain that to you if you don't understand how to adjust to modified slots. And the reason being for the updated change is we're going back to the way the budget displays have looked in previous years. And when I say previous years, I mean about 3 to 4 years back. This prevents you from having to do transfers. And it just allows you to just understand your limitations and what you must at least set aside for participant wages and fringe benefits, as well as that 8% admin. Okay. And the revised budget display will be sent out and will be posted on the web tomorrow. Okay. So high cap.
Okay, so the high cap budget display, this shows again a full version of the actual budget display. We've circled the footnotes to show that that's what we'll be going over. The next slide, again, just shows it in more easier to review, to look at. So on footnote A, though it's not general fund, it's state funds, so those funds must again be reported as expended during the state fiscal year that ends on June 30th, 2017, and final expenditures will be reported in the closeout that's due on August 15th. The footnote for B, which is, if you look down, it's the third and fourth line item on our display here. Those funds must be obligated by March 31st. Those are, again, the HICAP grant closes and ends on March 31st, so those funds must be obligated by that date. And then final expenditures will need to be reported in the closeout on May 15th. This is, again, like June mentioned earlier, to meet the federal reporting requirements. So that's why we need that information at that time. Item C, footnote C, if you look, it's the last item in that display. That is the new grant. So that's the HICAP grant that became available on April 1st. Therefore, those funds must be reported as reported on August 15th when you do the closeout, and those funds may be carried over into the next contract period. So similar as area plan, but just a little bit more straightforward because HICAP has less funding streams, if you will. And that is the 3 budget displays we were going to go over today. See, we have some questions.
We do have some questions that have come in. So our first question, is there a limit under the footnote 3 regarding how much unspent funds can be carried over?
So we're looking at, I'm thinking we're talking about area plan. So if we're talking about area plan, and under footnote 3, a limit of how much can be carried over, June?
So this limit is not changed. You're still going to have that 5% that you would get to keep as far as carryover and OTO funding, if that's what this question is in referencing. That's all that you get to keep, and that's just with federal dollars. Anything beyond 5% will be reallocated out to all other AAAs. So, everybody gets, so, hopefully you've spent 95% of all of your funding, and so, or 100%, and there will be no carryover, but at 95%, you'd get to keep all of that. So it would be that 5% of carryover that you would get to keep.
And then the rest would be distributed out through the reallocation process that we do when we process the amendment to the next contract.
Mm-hmm. And then our next question, is there allowable carryover for HICAP unspent funds and any different than Title III or Title VII? So HICAP is a little bit different because of how the grants run for HICAP. You have a limit in there for HICAP because you do have 2 federal grants tied in there, and that last 3 months of funding will carry over into another contract. The first 9 months, there's no carryover associated with that because it comes from a previous grant, and you may have already carried dollars into that.
Right, and that would, so like when, and again, like June said, those 3 months is part of the carryover that's going to go into the next contract. So those are the funds. Now, is it any different than for Title III and VII? It's different in the timing of the grants, but it's somewhat similar in the concept. But in area plan, it's those first 3 months. It's the July through September funds that can no longer be carried over for the area plan. So that's just the difference. It's pretty much just the timing of the period that's not allowed to be carried over.
And so, with that, your OTO funding or carryover is reallocated into that period of time, and that must be spent by the end of your contract period. It will not carry. You must spend it. So it needs to be reported as fully expended. So use those dollars first.
And report them that way, yes.
Okay, so our next question, are we taking questions at the end? Yes, that's what we're doing right now. And it says, though transfer is due on May 1st, 2016, I'm assuming this should be May 1st, 2016, or when the budget is due. You're correct in that it is when the budget is due. I understand why the question has been asked because there have been a few, since the budget display changed and since there's been some other requirements when it comes to equipment purchases and tracking the equipment purchases, we have updated that budget template that's due from the AAAs to us. And that's just been a recent release that's gone out to you. Yeah, so your transfers are due with your budget. So, but please look at the footnotes so you ensure that you are only requesting transfers for the correct period of time, because you do have 2 grants associated in that contract. Do you have anything you want to add? Okay. All right. So next question. Related to the current question, what is the process that we use to elect to keep the 5%? So I don't necessarily know if it's an election to keep the 5% of what you have unspent. If you have anything that's not spent, so if you didn't spend 100% of it, 5% does go back to you, and this is just your federal dollars, and I'm hoping that you're speaking about area plan. So I'm hoping the question's about area plan because I'm unclear which grant it's about. But 5% is allotted back to you. It's just the remaining of that. Anything beyond 5% will be reallocated out.
And so if you're asking too, then is it automatic? Is it that part? We will assume that unless told otherwise that you want to maintain that 5% if you have that much left.
Okay. So is it 5% of the total funds or 5% of title category?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 5% of your title category. So in some cases, you know, depending on your contractors, you might spend like all of your nutrition funding, so your Title C1 and C2, you know, and maybe something's happened with Title 3D because we know there's some new requirements there, so you might have additional funds left. So it is with your title category. And keep in mind, these are federal dollars that we're talking about, not your state general fund that's allocated to you. So because some of your contracts do contain state dollars, and those state dollars do not carry over. So, okay, is HICAP CFDA number 93.324 instead of 92.324 for HIFL 15-15 also applied to FY 15-16?
Okay, so the HICAP grants did change, and so when you're talking about the HIFYL, you're talking about the project in that column on the HICAP. And those projects, when you have the 15-15 and the 15-16, we're putting those on separate lines because they are separate grants. However, you're asking, is that the difference? And that is the difference. It's different grants. But I'm not clear on when you're saying also applied to. So maybe those same period, yes, the footnotes do apply to both of those projects. And I think that's the question you're asking. And yes, it does apply to both of those projects.
And we have a comment that's come in, so I just want to say thank you in return, because it sounds like that the clarification on the elect to keep the 5%, the AAA understands our response, so we greatly appreciate your response back to us. And so these are all the questions that have come in to us, you know, via our webinar system. We would also like to open it up to receive any questions if you want to call, if you actually want to unmute your phones and ask the questions, because not everybody is comfortable with responding and typing in the questions. So if there's any additional questions, we can go ahead and unmute lines, and so you're welcome to ask.
Are you hearing anything on your side? I'm not. I'm not hearing any questions. I hear you. I have everything over here muted, and I can hear you and me. Somehow my speakers, even on this, I can still hear you. Is anybody else talking? Okay. All right. I hung up.
We're getting questions for asking the webinar is over. Is there a way for people to raise their hand if they can hear us?
Yeah, they can click on the little hand symbol.
If you can hear us, please click on the little hand signal that should be on your screen.
Everyone wants to stick in yours.
Okay, so the webinar is still continuing. Do we have any further questions that you'd like to raise either verbally over the telephone line or type into us? You can do it through the email.
So we're not able to hear you, just muted the background noise. Well,
I would suggest that you stay on the line for about 5 minutes because sometimes someone else's question could be a question that you just didn't think of.
okay, it must be over, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well,
I don't see anything.
mm-mm. It's like, don't leave us. Okay. Well, all right, we'll call it.
But they should announce it, right? That it's
I
over.
do, it's so weird.
See if that.
Okay, it appears that you're having a difficult time hearing us. There we go. Now you can hear me, can't you? All right, so like I said, we'd like to give it just a couple more minutes in case there are any additional questions. And so we're at 11:31, which is record time for us. So we finished a little bit early, so we'd like to at least go to 11:35. And then if there are no questions at that given point, we'd like to thank everybody for attending. Please know that we're available for you if you have additional questions as you start to move through preparing your budgets or sending your funds requests in. Oh, okay. Will there be a follow-up webinar on completing the area plan budget? So at this point in time, we're not planning on a webinar on completing the area plan budget. I understand why this particular AAA is saying that, though, because you have new fiscal officers. My suggestion is you contact Vern Foster or Chia Lord directly. They can walk your fiscal officer through that process. The difficult thing with this is each one of your AAAs are individual, and for us to go through a planning piece of this or a training, it's so individualized what you need to do for that budget, because a lot of times you're moving funding based upon your area plan itself. And so my suggestion with this is contact your assigned fiscal specialist, and they can walk that person directly through that. Oh, I thought there was more. Can we talk about the new section for equipment purchase? So the new section for equipment purchase, I'm going to go through that really fast. For those of you who saw the new budget form, the new last page for equipment purchase, there is a purpose for that. The new last page for the equipment purchase is the reality that comes down to CDA tracking equipment. We track it at the end. And so once that equipment is purchased, at the very beginning, it's nice to know what you're going to purchase and for our teams to have the opportunity to evaluate the necessity of that purchase, just to ensure that once again we're going through this transparency piece. Because the federal government, on some of our reports with our Title V programs and with HICAP at this given point in time, they are requiring to know how much and what was purchased, you know, almost an exact. And so this ensures that from the beginning at the budget cycle, we can make sure that it's an allowable cost. And it also helps you as a AAA to avoid an audit finding. Oh, and you're welcome. We have a thank you that's come in. So any additional questions? Okay. I think with that, again, Amanda and I, we thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to work with us on this, and I am happy to discuss anything additional with you. I can see that we have some budget questions as you're filling out your budgets. Don't be shy to email or call, and if you're unable to reach me, you know, feel free to reach out to Chia and Vern, because if for some reason that budget's not filled out correctly, you know they're going to send it back to you. And so let's try and get it done right the first time. Thank you.
Thank you.